The coat check attendant looked at her once and then looked away, the way people do when they've already decided someone isn't worth a second glance. Zara Adeyemi handed over her coat anyway. She said thank you anyway. She stood in the marble lobby of the Meridian Club and looked around the way she always did in rooms like this. Quietly, carefully, the way you read a room before you let it read you. The Meridian Club was exactly what its reputation promised. Dark oak paneling that had been polished so many times it had stopped looking like wood and started looking like money. Brass fixtures that caught the light from the ceiling and threw it back in small, deliberate gleams. The kind of interior that didn't try to impress you because it had never needed to try. 312 years old. The oldest private equity networking dinner in Ontario. Black tie, invitation only. The kind of event where people who ran things came to meet other people who ran things, and where running things meant something specific. Old firms, old names, old money that had learned how to look new without actually becoming new. Zara moved through the entrance hall without rushing. She wore a deep charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, simple pearl studs, no other jewelry. Her hair was natural and pulled back with a single clip. She carried nothing but a small card wallet. She had dressed the way she always dressed for rooms like this. Not to be seen, not yet, and not to disappear either. Just to be present in a way that didn't require anyone else's acknowledgement. Two men near the entrance glanced at her, and then resumed their conversation. A woman in a floor-length gown stepped slightly to the side as Zara passed, the way you step aside for someone you've assessed and placed and moved on from in the space of a breath. Zara noticed, she always noticed, and she had learned a long time ago that noticing and reacting were two very different things. She had been here before, not in this building, not at this specific dinner, but in this exact moment. The moment before a room full of people who had never seen power look like her made their quiet, automatic calculations about what she must be there to do. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server's tray, found a position near the edge of the main reception hall, and stood still. She was very good at standing still. The Meridian dinner was nominally a celebration. Vantage Capital Partners had just closed the largest private equity acquisition in Canadian history, a $4.2 billion deal that had taken 19 months of negotiations, 3 collapsed offers, and 1 spectacular near disaster in the third quarter that had required, according to the people who knew, a single phone call to the right person at exactly the right moment to pull the whole thing back from the edge. The room was full of the people who had been in the room when it happened, or who wanted to be associated with the people who had been in the room when it happened, which in finance amounted to roughly the same thing. Zara had made that phone call. Nobody in this room knew that yet. Most of them didn't know her name. 1 or 2 of the senior partners at Vantage knew her face, but only in the context of a conference room, a document review, a number on a spreadsheet that had come back better than anyone expected. They didn't know the rest. They hadn't needed to know the rest until tonight. She was in no particular hurry for them to find out. She watched the room the way she had been watching rooms since she was 12 years old, learning how they worked, who held the actual weight, who was performing influence versus who simply had it. A skill her mother had called reading the air. Zara had always thought of it as something simpler than that. You paid attention. You didn't mistake loudness for power. You noticed who other people moved toward and who they moved slightly away from. And you waited. That was when Brendan Holloway found her. She noticed him before he arrived at her side. Late 40s, charcoal suit fitted to the point of precision, silver at the temples in a way he had clearly decided was distinguished rather than aged. He moved through the room with the particular ease of someone who had spent so long being the most important person, in every conversation that it had stopped feeling like effort. He scanned the space as he moved. Not looking for anyone specifically, just checking, the way people check to make sure the landscape remained correctly arranged. He looked at Zara the way you look at something that doesn't immediately resolve into a recognizable category. He stepped closer. The main reception is downstairs, he said. Not unkindly, informatively, the tone of a man who assumes he is being helpful. This level is reserved for Vantage partners and invited guests. Zara looked at him. I know, she said. He waited. She didn't explain herself. His expression shifted slightly, the micro-adjustment of a man who had expected a different response and was now recalibrating. Are you with the venue staff or? No, Zara said and turned her attention back to the room. There was a silence, not an awkward one, not for Zara. She was comfortable in silences. She had learned that most people weren't, and that the discomfort was always more useful than filling it. Brendan didn't leave. That was the thing about men like Brendan Holloway. They didn't leave. They pressed, because pressing was the only mode they knew, and because in their experience, pressing always produced the result they wanted. He glanced at her water glass, then at the way she was standing, then at the small wallet she held. You're here for the dinner? The inflection made it almost a question and almost not. Yes, she said, in what capacity? And there it was, the particular phrasing that managed to sound professional while asking someone to justify their presence. In what capacity? As though her presence required a capacity. As though being there wasn't itself sufficient. Guest, she said. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Guest of which partner? Zara turned and looked at him directly. She had a way of doing this. Of bringing the full weight of her attention to bear without any accompanying expression. Like a lens adjusting to focus. Brendan Holloway was not used to being looked at this way. He was used to being the one who decided when eye contact happened and how long it lasted. I received an invitation, she said. And then she looked away again. He stood for a moment longer. Then he nodded, the tight nod of a man who has decided to attribute the encounter to some administrative confusion, and moved away. Zara watched him go and felt nothing except a kind of familiar, weary recognition. She had been managing moments like this one since she was 24. They didn't diminish her. They didn't surprise her. They were simply part of the landscape of rooms she had spent her career learning to move through. She went back to watching. Brendan Holloway was the kind of man who needed a witness. Within 20 minutes of their first exchange, he had located one, his colleague, a junior partner named Preston Mercer, who was younger and louder, and had spent approximately 6 years mastering the art of laughing at the right moment. The two of them stood near the bar with a third man Zara didn't recognize. And she could read the geography of their conversation from across the room. Brendan was explaining something. Preston was responding with enthusiasm. The third man was listening with the measured engagement of someone deciding whether to agree. Twice in the next half hour, Brendan looked in her direction. Not at her specifically, just in the direction of where she was standing, the way you glance at something that has lodged itself uncomfortably in the corner of your awareness. The third time he drifted back, he brought Preston. The thing about these events, Brendan said, loudly enough for Zara to hear while directing his words at Preston, is that access is the product. The whole point of a room like this is the curation. Not everyone can contribute at the level this conversation requires. Preston made a sound of agreement. It's nothing personal, Brendan continued, with the ease of a man who says things he means while needing to believe they are merely observations. It's just that investment at this tier requires a certain kind of track record, a certain kind of network, a certain kind of, he paused, seemed to choose his next word carefully, foundation. He wasn't looking at Zara when he said it, he was slightly, precisely not looking at her. Preston said, absolutely, it's about pattern recognition, right? You know what you're looking for. Exactly, Brendan said. And you know what doesn't fit the pattern. He picked up his drink. He still wasn't looking at Zara. But the performance wasn't for Preston. Zara looked at the side of Brendan Holloway's face and felt something she recognized. Not anger, not hurt, but a specific tired precision, the feeling of watching someone confirm something you had already understood about them a long time ago. He believed what he was saying. That was the part that had taken her years to understand. Men like Brendan Holloway didn't lie. They just built entire systems of thought that let them say cruel things while remaining, in their own minds, completely rational. She thought about the email chain, the one from 19 months ago, the one where Vantage Capital's internal deal team had flagged her firm's acquisition strategy as too aggressive, the approach too unfamiliar, the lead too unknown. The email where someone had written, she still remembered the exact words, not sure we can get comfortable with who's driving this. She had read that email because it had been forwarded to her by mistake. She had saved it. She had filed it carefully and said nothing. And then she had spent the next 14 months making the deal work anyway. She was very good at waiting. The dinner announcement came at 8:45. A clean chime, a slight dimming of the overhead lights, the kind of shift that happens before something deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, said the event coordinator, smooth and unhurried, from the entrance to the dining hall. Before we move to dinner, Vantage Capital Partners would like to formally acknowledge the individuals whose work made this acquisition possible. We'll begin with remarks from the architect of the Caldwell Meridian transaction. Please welcome Zara Adeyemi, founder and managing partner of AD Capital Group. Brendan Holloway was mid-sentence when the words landed. He stopped. He turned toward the small raised platform near the entrance to the dining hall, where he presumably expected to see someone arriving. Someone being escorted in, someone he had failed to notice earlier in the evening. Zara set down her water glass and walked to the platform. The room didn't break into applause immediately. It went still first, the specific, compressed stillness of a space in which a large number of people are revising something they believe to be true. Then the applause began, and it was real and it was sustained, and several people near the front were already turning toward each other with the expression of people who recognize they are watching something they should have seen coming and didn't. Behind the small podium on the wall that the venue had configured for the evening, the presentation screens that had been cycling through Vantage's portfolio highlights all evening went to a single slide. AD Capital Group. Founded, 2011. Assets under management, $3.1 billion. The Caldwell Meridian transaction was a text block in the center. Largest private equity acquisition in Canadian history. Lead architect, Zara Adeyemi. Closing remarks from the Globe and Mail, from the Financial Post, from Bloomberg Canada, cycling through in calm, unhurried succession. Brendan Holloway's drink was still in his hand. He didn't put it down. He seemed to have forgotten it existed. Around him, Preston Mercer had gone very quiet. The third man from their earlier conversation had taken a half step back and appeared to be examining the ceiling. At the podium, Zara stood without notes. She had never needed notes for this. She looked out at the room with the same unhurried composure she had carried all evening, and nothing about her had changed. Her expression, her posture, the particular stillness she carried like something worn in. She had been this the whole time. That was the thing some of the people in this room were only now understanding. She had always been this. The Caldwell Meridian transaction closed because of discipline, she said. Her voice was clear and even and moved through the room without effort. Not because of who was in the room, because of who did the work, and who refused to stop doing it when the room made clear they would prefer someone else. She paused. There was a moment in Q3 of last year when this deal was 48 hours from collapse. I'm not going to describe that moment in detail tonight. A small number of people in the room laughed. The kind of laugh that contains recognition. What I will say is that the people who held this transaction together were not always the people who expected to be acknowledged for it, and I think it's worth being clear about that here, in a room that is built on the idea that access reflects merit. The dining hall was very quiet in the way that only happens when a crowd is simultaneously trying not to look at one specific person and failing. Rooms like this one, Zara said, have spent a long time deciding in advance what the right kind of track record looks like. What foundation means, what pattern recognition means. I've heard those phrases used tonight. She didn't look at Brendan, she didn't need to. The deal this room is celebrating tonight was built by people who didn't match the pattern. I'd encourage you to sit with that. She thanked Vantage, she thanked her team. She stepped away from the podium and the applause that followed her was different from the applause that greets expected things. It was the kind that comes from people who are recalibrating. The dinner unraveled in the way that things unravel when the ground has shifted without warning. Conversations that had been easy an hour ago became careful. Men who had been laughing with Brendan Holloway at the bar now found themselves involved in other conversations. At other ends of the room, with their backs at a particular angle that communicated, without announcement, that they were no longer part of the same circle they had occupied. Before 8:45, Preston Mercer spent most of the dinner looking at his phone. The third man had not been seen since the presentation. Brendan Holloway ate dinner at his assigned table and said less than he normally said. The people around him ate dinner and said things that were polite and brief and complete. The conversational equivalent of doors closing gently. He found Zara in the corridor outside the dining hall after the meal. She was standing at a window that looked out over King Street, watching the cars move through the rain below. She was alone. She had chosen to be. He almost didn't come. She could tell from the way he approached. The particular hesitation of a man who had talked himself into something he knew was necessary and hadn't fully talked himself into believing he deserved to do. Mrs. Adeyemi, he said. She turned. She looked at him without surprise. I said some things tonight that were wrong. He paused, the pause of a man searching for the phrasing that will sound genuine. Out of line, and I owe you an apology for that. He wanted her to accept it, she could see that. He wanted the apology received quickly and cleanly, so that the evening could be revised in his memory into something he could live with. Zara looked at him for a long moment. What exactly are you sorry for? She asked. For what I said. The comments about not fitting the pattern. You weren't wrong about the pattern, she said. You were describing something real. The pattern exists. You helped build it. He stopped. The thing I'm curious about, she said, is whether you would be sorry if I were still standing on the other side of that screen when it lit up tonight. Whether any of this feels wrong to you in a room where I'm just a woman holding a glass of water, who made you slightly uncomfortable. Brendan didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to. The apology isn't the problem, she said. I believe you mean it now. I believe you'll mean it for a while. She looked at him, with the particular, measured clarity of someone who has thought about this longer than he knows. But, what you said tonight, foundation pattern. Not sure we can get comfortable with who's driving this. Those weren't slips. They're how you actually think. And an apology doesn't reach that far. He opened his mouth. I'm not angry at you, she said. I want you to understand that. I stopped being angry at men like you about 8 years ago because it was taking up space I needed for other things. But you should know what your words do in rooms where the person you said them about doesn't have a presentation screen behind her. She looked at him steadily. Go think about that. Not about tonight. About all the other times. She looked at him for one more moment, not with contempt, not with satisfaction, just with the clear, settled attention of someone who has finished a conversation. Then she turned back to the window. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked back toward the dining hall. He didn't find the conversation he was looking for when he got there. The people he would have talked to were already in their coats, already at the elevators, already somewhere else. The clip that circulated first was someone's shaky phone video of the presentation screen lighting up. Just the text. ADE Capital Group, $3.1 billion, largest PE acquisition in Canadian history. The comments filled in the context faster than any news piece could have. By morning, the story had the shape it would keep. A woman told she didn't fit the pattern had closed the deal that the pattern couldn't. There was a longer piece in the Globe 2 days later. A source who had been in the room that evening told the journalist about the comment Brendan had made. The one about foundation, about the pattern, about what doesn't fit. Brendan's firm issued a statement. It used words like unacceptable and not reflective of our values, which is the language firms use when they are managing something rather than changing something. Brendan was placed on administrative leave pending review. The review was ongoing. Preston Mercer's LinkedIn activity went quiet for 3 weeks. But the moment that stayed, the one that people passed around in finance circles and beyond them, was not the speech. It was not the clip. It was a photograph taken outside the Meridian Club's Bay Street entrance on the morning after the dinner. Zara stood on the pavement below the building. She was in a wool coat, coffee in hand, looking up. Above her, workers on a lift were doing something to the building's street-facing panel, the large display that the Meridian Club used for its featured partnership announcements. For 11 years, that panel had shown the same rotating set of names, the same firms, the same faces, the same particular version of what leadership in Canadian finance was supposed to look like. The old panel came down in pieces, and in its place going up slowly was a new one, AD Capital Group, and beneath it Zara Adeyemi's name, in the same clean, brass effect lettering the Meridian Club had used for 112 years to confer its version of legitimacy. She watched until it was done. Then she finished her coffee, buttoned her coat, and walked through the front doors of the building without looking back. Not because she had proven something, but because she had always known it. The proof had only ever been for the room. If this story stayed with you, you already know what to do. Like, share, and subscribe to Bravsoul Stories TV for more stories where the room finds out it was wrong. And tell me in the comments, what hit you harder, the moment Brendan turned toward the wrong door, or the panel going up the next morning?